Okay, so today I'm going to do a demo on how to add ZBrush to your workflow for adding detail to your models and then baking that detail into your low polys. So I'm going to start in ZBrush. I'm going to go back to the crate I was working on a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to import that. So this guy, I brought into ZBrush. And ZBrush is a really fun sculpting tool. I don't know if you've used it before, but this will be a bit of a crash course on just how to take something you've made in Maya or 3ds Max and bang it up a little bit and add some more personalized detail and some stuff that'll get transferred into normal information without having to rely on the texture to communicate all that. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our brush menu. I have a bunch of custom brushes. You can talk to me or email me if you're interested in ZBrush and adding more to your repertoire. But with basic ZBrush, you can do a whole lot. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So first things first, we are going to look at the geometry. So this is just a single smooth on a high poly that I did, and unfortunately, this is not sufficient for ZBrush modeling. Because with ZBrush, it's a lot like working in Photoshop, where each plane is treated as a pixel worth of resolution. So if I try to sculpt on this with the basic clay build-up brush, which is the best, it's bread and butter, it's going to look like this. And it's going to look like I'm drawing on a stretched, low-resolution Photoshop image. So what we got to do is we got to reset the geometry for ZBrush purposes. So I'm going to split this into parts, and that just divides anything that's not connected by geometry into separate pieces. So right now the eagle is floating; it's not sewn into the crate, so I'm going to leave that detached, and I'm going to hide it. So now I just have this guy that I'm going to do some work on. So down here under geometry, we have some fun tools for setting up a model for sculpting, namely Dynamesh. So what Dynamesh does is it projects a grid over the entire model and equalizes the size of all of the polygons. So note that with this wireframe, everything is crisp along the edges. So like we get these really crisp edges, and the broad planes are a lot simpler and a lot stranger shapes that aren't conducive to sculpting. So what we need to do is we need to project that grid. So what we have here is the Dynamesh option to turn it on, some other options that I'll get into later, and then the resolution, which is what's most important right now. So if we just hit Dynamesh right off the bat, it'll take a second, and it'll turn everything into this grid shape. And you'll lose some detail here because it's trying to turn everything into these same size squares, and it's going to lose your real tight edges. But what you have instead is that you can draw over the entire thing, and it starts to look a bit more like a usable canvas. So I'm going to jump back to here, and I'm going to turn up the resolution. I found that powers of 2 resolutions work best, so the default's like 128, but you can go up to like 256, 512, 1024. You can use the slider, but those are generally safer and they give you cleaner results. I'm going to turn on Dynamesh at 512. It's going to take a second, and you can see that it starts to get retain a lot more of the resolution I had before, while also giving me this clean canvas to work with. Cool. So this is a great place to start with sculpting. Yeah, this is a good canvas. So we're going to do some damage to this crate. We're going to treat it like it was dropped, like it was scratched, and then I'm going to show you how to take that out of ZBrush and into the main model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my brush options, and I'm going to choose trim dynamic is a fun. So what ZBrush does is it lets you use hotkeys based on the abbreviations of the brushes. So they can be hard to find in here, and it's also really, yeah, you just have to spend some time in the program and learn to memorize these things. So your bread and butter tools are clay buildup, which lets you just add clay directly onto the sculpt, and that is BCB, so BCB, and that takes you clay buildup. The one I'm going to show you right now is Trim Dynamic, so BTD, and that one just lets me bang up the edges. So, just do a little bit of damage. And Trim Dynamic's really nice for stylized stuff, so like Overwatch and World of Warcraft make a lot of ample use of this kind of sculpting, where you're just like big flat edges. So instead of the crisp edges that you get directly out of your sculpt or modeling program, you have these more painterly edges that look like they were hand sculpted, and that's a really important thing for stylized games, and just like detail that can be seen from far away is generally a nice thing in games. So even in more photorealistic stuff, you want stuff that that has a roughness to it on the edges, so that you so that the player gets the shorthand of what you're trying to show. Because if everything is very small edges, everything is going to look like it's like fresh out of the IKEA catalog, and that's not how real life is. Like, real life is dirty, real life is busted up around the edges and dropped a few times. So treat your models like that, and your portfolio will shine for it. So that's some treatment you can give your edges. Trim Dynamic is especially nice for stone. So just like taking something that, let's say I wanted this chest made of stone, I would say it's been chiseled to look like this. It's not something that's been machined. It's been chipped away, and maybe the sculptor slipped a few times, and so we've got these big divots in the edges. And we start to see something that looks a little like it's been rough hewn. This could also work for wood planks if something was sculpted from a block of wood, from like a bunch of 2x4s, and whatever that tool is, where you're chiseling away at the edge of wood, you get the same kind of effect. So next I'm going to show you is one of the hidden brushes I like. It's called Mallet Fast. So ZBrush has a bunch of hidden options. So you can go to your lightbox, your brush, under mallet, mallet fast. So what mallet fast does is it's kind of like an inverse of the clay buildup tool, where instead of adding clay, you get to chip away at corners and edges. So this is really useful for wood and again rocky surfaces, and sometimes drop plastic. But you get these really hard-edged damaged things. So you just take that to your edges, beat them up a little bit. And what's nice is that since you're working from this, since you already have your low poly set up, you already know that your high poly kind of matches it. As long as you generally stick to the silhouette of your low poly, you can add any kind of this little bang up detail, and it'll show through on your normal map without you having to model it in at a later date. So stick to stuff on the inside where the player won't be able to see it. So this is a bit extreme, but for the most part, like, this is a really good example of something that could be baked onto a hard edge at the low poly without you needing to retopologize. So just stick to that. I'm gonna beat this up a little more. Yeah, so that feels like some nice extra detail. Holding down shift switches are just smooth, so you can clean up the edges a little bit and then keep that nice detail where the smooth exterior has been beaten away to reveal the more particulate, the more granular interior. So once you've established some fun large detail, you can get into alpha masks, and this is where you add noise and you add like rust and such. So if you use BST, that takes you back to the standard brush, which is the one that ZBrush opens on. And normally, what people think when they see the standard brush is that it's this really soft drawing tool, and it's okay. As a sculpting tool, it's not great. I found that clay buildup works a lot better, just because it's got this nice even raise, whereas the standard brush tends to add pinching and adds weird effects when it goes over existing detail. So again, use BCB clay buildup for general sculpting, and BST for your alphas. So we're going to turn it off from drawing mode because we don't want it to do that. I'm going to turn off that mode as well. I'll show you that later. So right now, what it does is it uses a stroke mode. So every stroke adds some clay. So we're going to switch it to drag rectangle. And what drag rectangle does when you don't turn anything on is it just takes whatever the alpha is, or the shape of the brush, and applies it in a dragged shape based on where your starting point is and how you drag it. And then we're going to go into the alphas, and there's a lot of fun default alphas in ZBrush that can be used to add a lot of really neat detail. So you've got like this one. This is just like scratch striations, and by default, when you drag it out, you have these raised ridges. Now hold Alt, drag it out again, and it looks like Jurassic Park Velociraptor took a chunk out of your whatever you're making. So yeah, that one's fun. So just use your alphas wherever you please. Add some fun detail. So instead of having to sculpt each of these scratches individually, you just use an alpha. And these alphas are all, there's a lot of people on like Gumroad and ArtStation that make their custom alphas fairly available, often freely, because they're really just Photoshop of black and white image of where white is up, black is down, and plug that in as an alpha, and ZBrush knows how to apply that. So some fun detail there. There's a lot of fun noises, so like these dots where maybe rust is gathered in the corners. So I'm just going to add a little rust particulates where it's been. Some of this grime has started to build up. This could be dirt, this could be rust, it could be moss. There's some fun stuff. The really small noises, like this one, are fun for like a final pass when you want to just add a level of grain and realism to whatever you're doing. So if you turn down the intensity, you just drag out a little bit of noise. You start to get like, oh, here's where the paint had some detail in it. Here's where some dust gathered in the corners. And you start to get something that feels a lot more real and a lot more textured even before you start adding the color texture. Because all this is going to show up in your normal map, and so it's going to transfer right onto your textures without you having to worry about tiling, worry about having to specifically apply stuff to particular areas later on when you're painting. You can just sculpt it in. Just a little bit of noise, so it feels a bit more like it's lived in our world. Other fun stuff, just like various cracks, crack butcher. It's more useful for like organic stuff and rocks, but that's probably not right now. Yeah. So what we have here is we have a crate. Let's beat it up a little bit. I'm going to go back to the eagle and give it the same treatment. So again, Dynamesh, geometry, Dynamesh, 512, probably a good starting point. So again, this is the wrong geometry, so I just hit Dynamesh. And now we have something with the sculpt on. And you want to double check to make sure you're not losing too much detail. So I'm getting these weird stepping bits in the edges, so I'm actually going to turn it up another double to 1024. Dynamesh. And that looks a lot better. That's still preserving my crisp edges while giving me room to sculpt. Then go back to BTD for trim dynamic. And beat up these edges, because I figure when somebody was making this metallic eagle, they were hammering it out of solid gold, so they didn't quite get all the crisp edges that a modeling program can give you, because this thing wasn't 3D printed. This was a guy with a hammer. He beat it into shape, and here's where we're at now. So it's been dented on the edges. Give it a little more information for light to roll off it, and say, like, here's how the form turns. Here's what makes this interesting. So yeah, stuff like that. Okay, so once we're done, we're going to go back to the main subtool, and we're going to merge visible, and that'll give us back to a merged version of this on a separate project layer. Export as an OBJ. some damaged crate. We're going to take it in an arm set. So I still have the unwrapped crate from the previous week, so I don't need to change that. And now you can see that the high poly starts to has a lot of the same silhouette, but you can see where it stops overlapping because I've added more detail. And something I realized I forgot to show in the previous lesson was the importance of occasionally moving objects away from each other. Because sometimes you have stuff that overlaps, and I'll show you how that looks on a baker. So let's see. Okay. So when we look at the cage, we see that that this eagle, that there's a full UV that goes intersects with the crate proper, and comes out to about here. So what it's doing is it's going to take a picture from out here and project that onto the eagle. But what it's doing is it's intersecting with the crate itself. So I'm going to have if the crate weren't there, the eagle underneath would have the crate projected onto it. And sometimes that can be a problem. For static props like this, it's usually okay because stuff isn't going to move. But when you have really complex props that are intersecting with each other, like just various things that are overlap, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you can move pieces apart and explode them. So I'm going to take my low poly back into 3ds Max, and I'm going to split it up. Get this guy in. Select that one and detach it. Yeah. I need to reset my smoothing grips because the normals are broken now that I've re-imported an FBX. So reset those. Face mode. And soften on the edges. So we're back to normal, but instead of one object, these are now two objects. Export this again. Baker. And now I have a special version of the low poly that I can use for baking because it has a separate eagle. So I'm going to hide the original low poly. I'm going to select just the eagle. Looks like that is divided. So just the eagle parts. And I'm going to move them over to here. And what this does is when we look at the cage now the eagle has its own separate baking space so that nothing is intersecting. And it's only going to take a picture of the high poly that is separate out and out here. So the eagle is going to take a picture of the eagle, and the crate's going to take a picture of the crate. So I'm not going to bake the eagle into the surface of the crate itself, just the crate, just the eagle. But the UVs do not change, even though I've moved them here. So when I come back to the final low poly, it'll all be come back here. And then the second part of this is that now what I'm not going to get when things are split off like this is I'm not going to get the ambient occlusion shadow of the eagle sitting on the crate. So what that means is that I need a separate baker. So I'm going to make a second baker, and I'm going to take the condensed low poly that's still attached to itself, drag that into the high poly slot, even though it's the low poly. Control D to duplicate it, and move that onto the low poly. This is really important for people who aren't doing sculpted high poly props or very high poly props. So if you're doing Warcraft textures and painted textures and you're not doing full high poly, this will give you a clean ambient occlusion, even though you don't have a high poly mesh. So use your low poly as the high poly and set up a second baker. So back to the first one, we're gonna do our configure our maps. So same as last time, curvature, ambient occlusion, material ID. Configure to add. We're not going to add the position map this time because the position is going to be wrong for the eagle because it's dragged off of the main map. So we're going to leave that one off. And what we're going to so we're going to name this bakes create high soften to 0.5. This is a high poly bake, not a low poly bake. Sample 16, padding extreme, and just for the sake of speed, I'm going to set this to 1024. Right, hide that baker, move over to this one, and also configure that. So same folder for baking. Create low. And this time we're not going to bake a normal map because there's no normal information on this low poly. So we're just going to bake ambient occlusion and position. And what that's going to give us is the context shadow where the eagle meets the crate, and the position map that we would have gotten on the other map. Position does not take high poly into account. It's just what part of the original mesh is the top, bottom, left, and right. Object space normals, which are similar to the position map, do take the high poly into account, so that one's actually something safe that we could bake on the high poly baker, but we're not going to right now. So baker 2, set that up, and samples 16, adding extreme, soften. For this one, we're going to soften it all the way because this is a low poly, and we want to get we don't want it to accidentally capture low poly detail in the ambient occlusion map. So we're going to soften all the way. And under ambient occlusion, we're going to turn off uniform. I'm not sure how the uniform checkbox works, but if it's turned on, you tend to get ugly stepping, especially on cylindrical stuff. So just turn it off when you're baking on the low poly. Leave it on for the high poly. So now everything's set up. This baker will reference the high poly and the low poly. This baker will reference the low poly and the low poly. And then what we're going to do is Control B to bake everything in the scene at once. And we're going to let that do its thing. Okay, so everything's baked. Now we're going to hide the high poly, hide one of the low poly so we can start to preview what we just did. So we're going to make a new material and apply it to this low poly, and we're going to give it the normal map. So with the high poly normal map, what we have now is the low poly has the sculpted detail. Oh, and it looks like I did not adjust the cage, so I'll have to go back and do that, but that's where it's clipping. That's a problem. But what we're starting to see is, oh, it has these scratches. It has these edge details that we added to it, which is really cool. Okay, and then we can look at the ambient occlusion as well. So with the high poly AO, what we have is, yep, the sculpted detail gets baked into the ambient occlusion, and also the curvature. Remember to set your stuff to sRGB in Microsoft because that's true color. Yeah, so the scrapes and the little dust details I'll add directly into the color map now. So when we start with our color map, we'll have this scrape detail that's already on the model and is already already perfectly laid out for us. All right. So back to the ambient occlusion. What we notice is that there's now no shadow between the eagle and the crate. So what we're going to look at instead is the low poly AO that we picked. And the low poly AO does have the shadow between the eagle and the crate. Now combined with the normal map, we have the sculpted detail and the contact shadows. Without the if we apply to the baked high poly, so hide the high poly. So we're just looking at this guy. If we drag this material on here, we see that the low poly bakes the eagle into the space. But if we take that off, and just do what we baked from the high poly, what we're seeing is that the eagle did not get baked into the crate, so it's a much cleaner layout, and it's so you're not losing any of the crate's detail. You're not warping anything because everything's laid on top of itself. So this is important for multi-pieced objects. So if you have something like a chest of drawers that is inside itself, if you have a box with a separate lid on it, you would move the lid off. You would take the drawers out. Sometimes if you have like floating detail, it's also part of the low poly. So handles on a box would need to be moved off and baked separately so that you're not accidentally adding detail to the to other meshes that are intersecting. So what we can do with this information now is jump into Substance Designer or Photoshop. Actually, I'll start with Photoshop just to give you a visualization of how to set up the color map with this new information. We're going to start with a new 1024 document. And just like we did last time, we're going to start with a 50% gray, because that's always a good starting point. And we're going to bring in our curvature, our high poly AO, and our low poly AO. Drop those in. Note that even though one was baked from the high poly, one from the low poly, the UVs are the same, so we can use both of these for to influence each other. So set them both to multiply, and you can see that they are now combined. So now we have shadow information from both the high poly that's very crisp and clean, and also the low poly, which gives us that important contact information that the high poly bake won't give us. And turn on the curvature, switch it to overlay, and all of the information starts to come together. So we're going to save this as our new color map. Let's apply that in Marmoset. We have something that incorporates both the contact shadow, the high poly shadow, and the curvature edge highlights into one mask. And then again, we do some fun stuff with the position map. We jump in and take the green channel, multiply that, save, and we get so what we're getting is the top to bottom information, the contact shadow information, and the sculpted high poly information without anything interfering with anything else. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording there, and then after that I'm going to talk about sculpting for tiling textures.